Hello everyone, I'm going to talk you through chapter 5 of the Norman Conquest. First things first, just for you to see that there is some stuff on YouTube that will be helpful for chapter 5. So this top one here, Domesday book. So notice what I've just typed in the search bar there, dead easy. Right, that cartoon's a good little cartoon just to explain about the Domesday book. Again, this one would be helpful as well. Alright, so life after the Norman Conquest, which is what chapter 5 is all about. As you remember about our Norman Conquest topic, it's all based around an interpretation. So chapter 5's interpretation is that the Norman Conquest resulted in a truckload of trouble. Now, that doesn't sound good to me. So the point that the historian Simon Sharma makes about the Norman Conquest is clearly that this is going to be a massive problem for England, that it brought a truckload of trouble, that the English clearly were not going to be happy about the Normans now running their country. Much like all the other interpretations that we've looked at, yes, there is evidence to support that. However, there's also evidence that will oppose that as well. Now, your first lesson for chapter 5 is based around the idea of the Domesday book. Right, you've all studied the Domesday book before. We would have mentioned this in year 7, all those many years ago. But let's just go through some of the basics. First things first, by 1085, William had been obviously King of England for a very long time. He dealt with all the rebellions, he'd built his beloved castles, and clearly he was hoping that all was now settled in England. However, there looked like there was going to be a threat from Denmark. The Danes were back. And he obviously, if England was going to be invaded, which, spoiler alert, it wasn't, but if England was going to be invaded, he needed obviously to know what money he had in case he needed to raise an army, etc, etc, etc. So he, as it says here, wanted to literally know who owned what in England. This was a massive undertaking, unlike anything else in the world at that time. It was such a big, massive book that actually ended up being 2 separate books, the little Domesday book, which would have covered where we lived, and then the Great Domesday book. Because let's face it, there wasn't much left in the north of England really to write about. The name the Domesday book wasn't even called the Domesday Book when it was made. It was, as it says here, the Book of Winchester or the Book of Treasury. Domesday came a little bit later because obviously, as you know from the Bible, Doomsday, Day of Judgment, you want to know what's what, right? So that's just a little bit about the background. And as I said, it was massive in terms of what it contained, 2 million words, even longer than my dissertation. And as it says here, again, pick out kind of like the key points. It was all about now seeing what England was. Remember, they had no idea. People had died in the Battle of Hastings, they died in the Battle of Stamford Bridge before that, died in the Battle of Fulford before that. They died in all these rebellions. William wanted to reward all his followers with lots and lots of land. So who owned what? No one knew. Right, so massive job. England, first things first, divide it into small parts. All very logical. He wants to know what everyone's got, so therefore he just needs to get this kind of like organised. So divide it up, as it says there. Look how many places they have to go and visit. Ask them bog standard questions. And then it's all about the answers. This bit here, all right, this again is key to your understanding. It's evidence of change. Fundamentally, it's evidence of who owned what. And who owned what in 1086 was going to be different to who owned what 20 years before. So, 6 months, send people around. Right, let's go see who owns what. All about getting the evidence. And as it says there, once they have the evidence, It can't be questioned. So you've got Saxons worrying about what land they owned, Normans worrying about what land they owned, but the big outcome of this is who owns what. The book itself, all right, already said, 2 million words. Written in Latin, definitely not going to write in English. All right, zero interest of English as a written communication for government. It was now going to be in Latin. This was the Norman Conquest. This is the big important bit. Why did they do it? So the tradition for, as it says there, many years, is that it was all about taxation. He wanted to know what the people owned, so therefore he could tax them. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yes, he does need that. The Danes are knocking at the door. But there's now evidence to show, actually, if it was for tax collection, it's set out really badly. It's set out in essentially alphabetical order. But as it says here, if you want to figure out things like tax, you need to set it out geographically, village by village, right? Because when you go around village by village, you'd want to know who owns what. So if it's not about tax, why? Fundamentally, again, goes back to what I mentioned earlier, it was probably about literally who owned what. So if it now said in the Domesday book, you own that land, that's it. It's all about, as it says there, legitimacy. Right? The Normans owned that land. It was there. No one could argue. Saxons can't argue. English can't argue. And then, look, he is the king. He owns that land. England is his, once and for all. The conquest finally guaranteed in this book. I am your king. This is my land. You cannot question it. Royal power and control. England was his. So that's the first lesson of chapter 5.